Hello once again and welcome to Herd Immunity News. I'm Marcus Botzer. Today I have the great pleasure in welcoming on Mr. Ben Habib onto our show. Ben is the deputy leader of the Reform Party and he's also standing in Wellingborough as a candidate for the Reform Party. This man has really lit up our screens for people looking for a breath of fresh air to say it like it is with courage and conviction. But that's not to say we're going to give him a completely easy ride over the time that he's given us today. But without further ado, Ben, how are you, sir?
I'm very well indeed, thank you. How are you?
Very well, very well. And really looking forward to the interview today. And as I say, thank you for giving us the time. We've got the election coming this Thursday. This Friday, we're going to know who's who. And I'm sure you'll back us up and say, anybody out there, please vote, because it's critical.
It's critical to vote. Get out and vote, for goodness sake. Just because you're pissed off with everyone, don't not vote.
Indeed. I mean, Nigel Farage, your party leader, has really said that this is the immigration election. But to expand on that, recently you've said this is really more about British national sovereignty and globalism. Could you expand on that for us a bit, please?
Yeah, so that's, I mean, what I see the vote for Brexit as, and then the reaffirmation of that vote in a set of subsequent plebiscites in the UK, you know, the 2017 general election, the 2019 European Union parliamentary elections, and then the 2019 general election, all of them were votes to leave the European Union. All of them were votes for restoring sovereignty to the United Kingdom. And sovereignty isn't just a technical term, it requires practical application. But we neither got it technically, and we certainly haven't got it practically applied. And for me, it boils down to the difference between those who wish to have our country governed through international principles, international agreements in association or at the behest of and subject to supranational institutions. That's one whole category of politician, which in my view includes the Conservative and Labour parties. And those of us who voted for leaving the European Union, who voted for a proud, independent, prosperous United Kingdom. And so for me, it is the globalists versus what I call the nationists. And I'm firmly in that category. Of course, a constituent part of being a nationist is territorial integrity as expressed through one's borders. And that is both control of legal migration and illegal migration, because you can't have a nation state that's being overwhelmed by foreigners, frankly. You know, you simply can't do it. Of course, we want to interact with the rest of the world and we want to learn from other people's cultures and their way of thinking and their philosophy. And through diversity of thought, we all progress. But there's a rate of progression in the evolution of any national culture, which can be accepted, tolerated, accommodated. And the kind of immigration that we're practicing at the moment is literally overwhelming the United Kingdom. And so Nigel calls it the immigration election, but for me, it's just a continued fight for Brexit and the championing of British national interests and those of British citizens over and above the interests of global institutions, about whom I don't really care. I don't really care about all the rest of it. I understand we need to cooperate globally, but I'm not going to run the country based on global principles. I want to do it on British national principles.
Absolutely. And within that, I take it you're including organisations like the World Health Organization, the World Economic Forum, the European Court of Human Rights, the EU, all of these
Absolutely.
super sort of national, unelected bureaucrats and technocrats, lest we forget what happened during the COVID era and the diktats that were enforced in that reign. Those are the organisations that you're referring to?
Those are exactly the organisations I'm referring to. And we would leave the European Court of Human Rights. We would remove it as the supreme judicial body in the United Kingdom. We would ban politicians from going to the World Economic Forum. We would certainly not enter into any pandemic treaties with the WHO, giving control of our pandemic management to the WHO, which is a body that's sympathetic to China. I mean, lockdowns are a really good example. You know, lockdowns were invented in China. They were invented in China. And Jeremy Hunt spoke glowingly of the way people were being nailed into their flats, and we imported that into Western civilization. That's ridiculous. It's absurd. And also the EU. Our fight with the EU ain't over. They still have control of Northern Ireland. They still have significant control of the United Kingdom right across the board in many areas, which we can discuss if you would like to do so. And our fight for sovereignty continues. And, and that's expressed by Nigel through this, calling it the immigration election. But for me, it's a holistic fight for the United Kingdom.
Indeed. I mean, you were interviewed earlier on today, and the host said that we've left the European Union. I mean, all but in name for many of us. You're a fantastic champion for Northern Ireland and the loyal people there. That clearly, Ben, as we've mentioned before in our interview that I did with you last year, Northern Ireland has been annexed with the United Kingdom.
It has, absolutely. It is under the heel of a foreign power. That's what it is. Laws made by a foreign legislature and enforced by a foreign court. That is the taking over of Northern Ireland. Normally, that's the kind of settlement you get when you lose a war. Yeah. It's not what your politicians just give up voluntarily. I mean, it's absolutely outrageous.
Yeah, I mean, this is the whole point. This is, again, one of Boris's clangers. We go on about Theresa May being maybe the worst prime minister because she turned her back on the Brexit result, and as did David Cameron. He literally turned his back and walked off till he got plucked out of obscurity and unelected, put down as our foreign secretary right in the middle of potential World War III. You couldn't make this stuff up. But Nigel has responded to Boris and held up the poster in response to the Putin, which will come on in a minute because the war in Ukraine, or the conflict in Ukraine, is very important. But the Tories seem to have no one to blame but themselves. They're running round telling everybody a vote for the Reform Party will be a vote for Labour. But did Sunak not call this election in the pouring rain with hundreds of candidates not in place or in power? He had people like Natalie Elphicke, the Dover Conservative, maybe one of the most right-wing Conservatives, running across to the Labour Party. It's almost like parody now, what's coming out of Sunak's mouth, is it not?
It is complete parody, and indeed the entire Conservative Party. We had Rory Stewart the other day saying his pen on the ballot paper would hover over the Liberal Democrats or Labour. And we had Ollie Robbins today, Theresa May's Brexit negotiator, saying he's going to join the Labour Party. And this attests to the point that I was making earlier, that actually we're run by globalists, and the Labour Party and the Conservative Party are just two forms of the same form of governance. They're not really in opposition to each other. There's no real difference in ideological position between the two parties. They both believe in being governed through these international treaties, high taxation, high regulations, the greater state intervention in our lives, the dumbing down of aspiration and the creation and embedding of dependency, turning their back on wealth creation. They've forgotten that it's fundamentally important to create wealth. They eschew the creation of wealth. I mean, the number of articles I've read in the last few days, maybe you have as well, but who cares if millionaires are leaving this country? To hell with them. I mean, that's what I'm reading in the press. Well, I tell you what, when capital leaves the UK, we will feel it,
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we pegged ourselves to the European Union's corporation tax. We were sitting around 20%, and we pegged ourselves to the nearly 25% that you have in the rest of Europe. Meanwhile, the one part of Europe that was keeping to a low corporation tax rate was actually the Republic of Ireland.
Absolutely.
But look, we're talking about economic catastrophe here. We're meant to be doing backflips, Ben, because GDP projections are for a 0.7% GDP growth. Oh yes, let's throw the champagne bottles up in there and wave hurrah. But look, we have this net zero catastrophe facing us right now. Now, you are a great champion for scrapping this. In fact, the Reform Party are a great champion for scrapping this completely. Can you just outline your concerns about following things like the Paris Climate Accord for our viewers?
So the net zero, drive to net zero by 2050 is a really good example of how policies made on the global stage are just very badly suited for the United Kingdom. I don't even want to get into the discussion about whether man-made carbon emissions are going to destroy the planet. Let's just assume that man-made carbon emissions are bad.
Yep.
What you don't do is take a country like the United Kingdom, which produces less than 1% of global carbon emissions, which is a relatively clean country on a carbon emissions per head basis. We're right at the bottom of the scale, and require us to get to 50% of our current, or whatever it was in 2019, carbon emissions by 2030, and then progressively get to 2050, because the journey that the UK economy has to take in order to deliver that is a very difficult journey. We're already clean. So to get cleaner requires us to really painfully, constrain the economy, turning our back on abundantly available natural gas in our own sea and so on. Whereas if you take the big polluters of the world, for them to reduce their carbon emissions by 50% by 2030, because they're big carbon emitters, it's much easier. Are you with me? And so we put this straitjacket on the UK before renewables, before nuclear power, assuming that they deem nuclear power to be a clean way of powering the country. We've put this straitjacket on our access to energy before we had alternative forms that could take up the slack. And that chap, Boris Johnson, signed something called the North Sea Transition Deal while we were all locked down in March 2021, which basically required fossil fuel companies to stop the extraction of offshore fossil fuels and to come more onshore with their employment and to change to offshore wind farms, etc. So we actually deliberately, ideologically turned our back on North Sea gas. And of course, when we unlocked and consumption for energy rose in this country, inflation went through the roof. It wasn't the Ukraine war that caused inflation. It was the turning our backs on fossil fuels and then unlocking the economy. We had a spike in demand for fuel. And now we've become, as a result of that stupid transition, energy dependent, because we have to import it from the US. And our economy continues to take hits. And it's just absolute madness.
Yeah, and you've increased the CO2 output from all the freight, all the
absolutely
the tankers coming across. It's something like 10 times, 4 to 10 times
what it would be if we produce it here.
That we produce it here. And this is the big problem that the Labour Party are going to have with the unions, Ben, because up in Scotland they want to put the kibosh on any new contracts, such as the Cambo oil fields just off the Orkneys. Unite, and all the workers have got billboards all over Scotland, and especially where I am, near the only oil refinery that we have, that the Greens, SNP and Labour have conspired to shut down. The Tories haven't really helped us. That means that Scotland will have absolutely no oil refinery for 99% of its petrol stations. So we'll be wholly reliant upon foreign imports. And England is probably looking at the same prospect under Labour. Is that not fair?
Well, I mean, it's a matter of fact, what you've just described. It's depressingly factual. But this is what I mean. So global policy made in the Paris Accord is absolutely destroying our ability to be energy independent, causing the cost of living crisis, and frankly, preventing the United Kingdom from being able to defend itself. Because if you can't get access to energy, how the hell are you going to fight Russia if there is going to be a war with Russia?
And to elaborate on that, the BRICS nations, that's Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and Saudi Arabia as well, waiting in the wings. Iran are now in BRICS. These people's average GDP is around 5 to 6% growth, wholly reliant upon fossil fuels. So we're going into the tank. These guys are going to be doing everything. They're meant to be our competitors. Every government, from Sleepy Joe Biden to our hapless leadership, want us to go to war with the people who are holding all the cards. It's insanity.
It's insanity. It's insanity. We've got to just have a reality check,
We do. Now we need to touch on not the elephant in the room, but the actor in the room. Yeah. Now, obviously, there's been a massive story. We've covered this at Herd Immunity News on the Channel 4, in inverted commas, expose, working with, as we've put it, investigating media company led by a former Labour Party candidate in Havering. This is Lee Sorrell Media Limited. So what are we looking at here? We're looking at being called conspiracy theories, conspiracy theorists, yet again, because Channel 4 have form on this. What are your thoughts on this whole debacle that happened in Clacton a couple of days ago?
So it came to my attention at about 10 p.m. on a Thursday night after a long day of canvassing, and I was exhausted getting into bed. And I saw this guy mouthing off, in that little clip that went viral, Andrew Parker mouthing off. And I thought to myself, oh my God, what is going on here? This is not good. And I went to bed. And the next morning I kind of was dozily. I don't know if you do this, but I was looking at my Twitter feed at sort of 4:35 a.m., just, having a look. And I saw that accusations of this guy being an actor were emerging. And I thought, well, I can't rely on the source, I'll have to verify this later on in the morning. And when I got up eventually at 7 a.m., the Twitter was alive with this guy and multiple sources saying he was an actor. And, his rough voice being depicted versus his normal voice. And accusations started flowing that this was a stitch-up. And I mean, it's too early for me to reach an absolute conclusion, but the fact that you have an actor who's putting on an accent, saying things that no sane-minded individual, even if you were a racist, xenophobic, extreme right-wing lunatic, you wouldn't go to someone's doorstep and say that kind of garbage. You just wouldn't do it. And for him to do it at the same time as there happens to be an undercover journalist present with a camera, I mean, the whole thing just smacks. It's not conspiracy theory. I mean, it just smacks of being a stitch-up, doesn't it?
It does. And when you think there was maybe 100 volunteers out that day, and so it's 100 to 1 shot, you got 1% chance that the undercover team that seemed to be working with Lee Sorrell Media Limited, that they just happened to get the guy who's standing and he's actually posing in shot. If you watch the footage, he's actually looking to make sure that this is our assessment of it, that the cameras are rolling, that the sound is good, he's getting the green light, and then he can say to a potential voter, as you said, and I'm a paramedic, I think he was, if the subjects don't survive, then you know what to do. I mean, what we're curious about, Ben, is where are the police in this? Why haven't they approached this man for obvious hate crimes caught on film?
I think we've made a complaint to the police, so we'll see how the police react. How did that paramedic react? I mean, I just saw the thing that was on Twitter.
I mean, he was stunned. He was shocked. He sort of kind of laughed. He probably didn't know what to do. I mean, this is a big guy. He's very intimidating, booming voice. He wouldn't intimidate you, sir, or us.
Oh, he would. I get very intimidated very easily.
Oh, well, I don't know. You're being humble. You're being humble. But look, in the end of the day, he was behaving like some character from a 1970s sitcom, something like Alf Garnett.
Absolutely. He really was.
He's an actor. They're a stitch-up investigation company. It will all remain to be seen what comes out about this. But on a positive note, I actually think this is going to get you more support. I think this is going to turn people off the mainstream media as they are in their millions. You only have to look at people like Tucker Carlson in America. His average audience on social media is about 50 million. CNN did the Joe Biden, President Trump, which I want your thoughts on. They did the Joe Biden, President Trump debate and got 2 to 3 million on CNN. So social media is absolutely killing it. And they seem to have your back. What were your thoughts of that, Ben, of the Biden-Trump debate? What do you think?
Well, I think it's a really sad reflection on the greatest power on the planet, that it can't produce a Democrat candidate who can string 2 words together. And Biden was bad when he took over in 2020 he came to office, I think it was. He was bad then. We were making jokes about his senility back then, but I mean, he's completely lost the plot. But it seems like he's going to be on the ticket in November. There's no mechanism easily to get rid of him. And, we're going to have a senile man running the most powerful country in the world.
Well, look, it's going to be interesting. What do you think of this scenario, which looks to be on the cards? President Trump is back again in the White House. Keir Starmer in the middle is Prime Minister, unfortunately for many of us. And then you've got Marine Le Pen, who got 33% in the first round in the elections yesterday. How does Keir Starmer cope with that?
Well, Keir Starmer, I think, is in for a shock, People keep telling me that isn't it interesting that Europe's going to the right and the UK is going to the left? And I just wanted to, it's not about left and right, it's about nationists versus globalists.
Sure.
The UK is very firmly heading towards the nationist in the nationist direction. It's just that the first past the post system makes it very difficult for us to get a position in Parliament. It looks like we're going to get one, by the way, even in first past the post system. But it just makes it difficult for us to get there. And the reason Labour will win if they do win is because most people are not voting. Most people are just fed up with everyone. The polls aren't really picking up the mood of the nation in this country because most people are reacting by saying, I'm not voting. So the real interesting thing is going to be on the 4th of July to see whether we get the kind of result we got in 2016, where people actually do come out and they see this as an important moment and they vote. And they won't be voting Conservative or Labour. This is almost like another referendum on Brexit. This is, and people need, if people voted for Brexit in 2016, what I would say to them is come out and vote for Reform UK, because you didn't get your Brexit. The mainstream parties let you down. Come out and vote for us now and we'll do it.
You know, Ben, you could have run on the tagline, let's really get Brexit done.
Yeah, we debated that. I had a long chat with Richard Tice about whether or not we did have iterations of our logo having, Brexit on it. And then for whatever reason, it was decided not to run with that. But actually, in my view, we're still fighting the Brexit fight. That's what's going on. This is the same fight as 2016. It's the same fight.
Exactly, because Brexit hasn't been done. And for all those people that say, oh, we have Brexit now. No, if I gave you a Ferrari or an Aston Martin and I said, well, use that, Ben, do something lovely with it, you wouldn't take it into a field and hook up your plough and try and get potatoes with it. And that to me, it might be a very basic analogy, but it's been misused, it's been abused intentionally. But what I want to really know is, you say you get 5 to 10 MPs, just pull that figure out and pop it down. That's very possible. Yeah. Many pollsters are predicting that this is on the cards, depending on how many people show up. What would the aim be when you're in Westminster? What would you sort of try to do to enact change that we're looking for?
So just to put 5 to 10 MPs into context, that is a politically seismic event of massive historic proportions. Last time there was an insurgent party, a genuinely new party, not a breakaway from the Liberal Party or the Labour Party or whatever, genuinely new party was the Labour Party, over 100 years ago. And so this will shake the political establishment to the boots. They will wonder what the hell is going on. How did this party get so many seats? And they will see it as so many seats. And we will be vocal. You might remember how vocal we were in the European Parliament. We're not going to go into Westminster and take the knee. We're going to go in there with a view to causing a bit of a fuss. And with those positions in Parliament, obviously also comes national recognition and national levels of funding and donors, and our coffers will grow and will become more powerful. And by the way, we've taken away from the Tories a lot of donors in the last couple of weeks who are now donating to us, and they won't go back to the Conservative Party. Some of these people did donate to us during the Brexit 2019 election for the European elections, but they then withdrew their support when it came to getting Boris elected. So in the general election, it's very rare for an insurgent party to get money coming to it from mainstream donors, for a better way of describing it. Having got these mainstream donors donating to Reform UK in a general election means that they're here to stay. They're not going back to the Conservative Party. I actually think, Mark, that this could be the end of the Conservative Party. This could be the end of the Conservative Party. And Reform UK will be the small c, nationalist, conservative, and genuinely unionist party. And, we will then build from there. And as Nigel has said a few times, 2029 is where we're aiming our guns. Right now it's the bridgehead. And then we need to become a proper party. We need a proper constitution and we need to democratize ourselves because at the moment it's controlled by Richard and Nigel and that sort of thing. But, we will turn into the movement that we've got in the people now needs to be manifested in a political party in parliament.
All true. And indeed, the big difference between this election and the 2019 election is that we're not standing 317 candidates down. And that was something that you pretty strongly were against. Is that correct?
That is a commitment I got from Richard Tice before I was prepared to join Reform UK. I was not going to join a party if it was merely going to turn out to be a pressure group for the Conservative Party. I don't see the Conservative Party as aligned with us ideologically in any shape or form. They're not.
No, they're not aligned with their own voters. And you saw that after we interviewed Richard down in just off Edgware Road at your last conference. And he said after Liz Truss was bounced out by the Bank of England, the markets, then he saw they were starting to come across now. I think you've passed the 50,000 threshold or thereabouts in membership. Yeah. You've got 200,000 people who are on your communications list. But look, just a little bit of encouragement. The SNP, not aligned with you in any way, but they went from 5 MPs to about 55 MPs, electoral boundary differences. But as you say, I think the 5-year declaration from Nigel that this is going to be his full-time job, that's where you're going to make changes along the way. Did you think that, were you all in on that statement and that commitment?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's absolutely vital that those of us who marched this nation up to the top of the hill now don't leave the battlefield. We've got to stay firm. We have created a movement. We've given people hope. And it was tragic that the hope that people vested in the Conservative Party to deliver Brexit was dashed, which is why we've got a democratic deficit and people not voting. And we, the Reform UK Party, must not dash people's hopes now. People like Nigel, Richard, myself, and others who've promoted ourselves into this position, who've made promises, a contract with the people, our equivalent of a manifesto. We must now stand our ground and we must deliver.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. There's a couple of more subjects that I want to ask you questions on, and this is where you and I will have an interesting discussion. You never know, we might agree. We agree on quite a lot. That's the problem. Maybe we don't want to be in a vacuum, dear friend. However, Nigel got a lot of flack over his comments. Surprise, surprise, when he said we should be mindful when we're looking at the conflict in Ukraine that warned the European Union that poking the Russian bear, in inverted comments, totally ripping up and destroying the Minsk Agreement of 2014 was a suicide mission, and it was always going to end in conflict. So, how do the British government resolve this issue?
So I think I'm less interested in how the war started now, frankly, than I am in how we should be prosecuting the war looking forward. There is a war in Ukraine. Russia has invaded Ukraine, and we now need to grapple with Russia. And absolutely, Russia is our enemy here. There's no doubt. There's no way of befriending someone that goes for whatever, if there was provocation or not provocation. I actually do think that Russia was provoked. European Union was flirting with giving membership to Ukraine. It was offering them 10 billion euros. When Yanukovych declined that 10 billion euros and took Russian money instead under pressure from the Kremlin, there was a revolt. He was deposed. There was bloodshed. And when that happened, Russia invaded Crimea. And then actually there's been a series, having said I'm not interested in the cause, the Minsk Agreement was something that was forced on Ukraine by France and Germany. And of course, that was huge encouragement to Russia that they could invade Crimea. And then France and Germany would force a peace settlement on Ukraine, which came, I think, I can't remember, 2016, was it, the Minsk Agreement? 2014. And 2014. And it came immediately after the Crimea did it, Crimean invasion. And then, of course, then after that, you also got the ridiculous situation of Germany building Nord Stream against all American advice making itself reliant on Russian gas and oil. And so that even after war had broken out with Ukraine, Germany was still buying Russian gas and oil. And I think it bloated Russia's coffers by 50 billion euros before someone blew up Nord Stream. And that someone, I imagine, was the Americans, I suspect. And so Europe's been a real problem. They've been a real problem all over the place. And we see the EU foreign policy being wrong just about at every single turn. When Trump wanted to, when Trump revoked that treaty that Obama had put in place with Iran, the EU was trying to go behind the US's back and set up a new clearing system with Iran so that it could undermine sanctions. I don't know if you're aware of that, Mark, but I was in the European Parliament then, and there was talk about how you set up a new clearing system to get around Trump's sanctions on Iran. I mean, how daft a position can you take? So the EU is absolutely bloody useless when it comes to foreign policy. But what we must do now is ask ourselves, in accordance with our nationalist approach, what is the best policy in Ukraine now for the United Kingdom? How do we make this happen? How do we get a resolution that's good for us? And in my view, the best moment for peace has gone. The best moment for peace was when our forces, Ukrainian forces supported by us, effectively evicted Russia from the large part of Ukraine and pinned them down. And from that position of strength, having got them cornered, a deal should have been tried, because you want to negotiate from a position of strength. My big fear in Ukraine now is that Russia has dug in deep. It's increased its military spend 8 or 9-fold. Who knows whether it can sustain that or not? But Russia has a habit of winning long-term wars. It doesn't lose, and we owe victory in World War II very significantly down to the Russians. And I think we underestimate Russia at our peril. I don't think they're going to give up Ukraine in a hurry. And my real fear is that Russia's going to break out of the Southeast region and it's going to go back to being on the ascendancy if we don't really get a grip of it. And and we're going to get the worst out of this, which is Russian missiles parked on the Polish border, which we do not want. So, I mean, I think we've got a problem in Ukraine, and we should have sued for peace, I think, when we had the upper hand. And what we've got to try and do somehow is get the upper hand now and then get some sort of peace agreement, but from a position of strength. We mustn't encourage Russia to think that they can get away with, expansionist territorial acquisitions. That would be a very wrong thing to reward, because that will encourage them to do more stuff like this. And so peace, I think, is needed. I don't think we should be giving Zelensky a blank check. We've made this mistake with the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. We made this mistake with Saddam Hussein in the 1980s, giving him a blank check against Iran. We gave the Mujahideen a blank check. And when you give people blank checks to do as they will without your national interest being, addressed, they become rogue. They go rogue. They do stuff against you. The Mujahideen obviously eventually became our enemy with the Taliban, and Osama bin Laden became our enemy. So we've got to be very careful how we fund things.
Look, when I see people like Ian Duncan Smith on wearing his Ukraine lapel, I just think how pathetic, how woeful. You've got mass open borders to everyone on the planet. If Putin wanted to invade, stick him in a dinghy. You couldn't do anything about it because they would use the human rights lobby to come down on it with a ton of bricks. So they're fascinated in spending hundreds of billions on Ukraine's border, but they're not interested in their own borders. Ben,
no, you're right. It's idiotic, and our own defences are so weak, and they're weakening. It's so idiotic.
Look, are any of these people, the Tobias Ellwoods, are they going to take up arms and run off to the border and be killed? Or their children? Of course they're not. Of course they're not. It's insanity. And Boris Johnson, I'm sure you scuppered a potential peace deal back in 2022, where these economies, and what the sanctions seem to have done, Ben, is only reinforce Russia's ties with China. Henry Kissinger spent his whole life trying to avoid this. And lest we forget, I put it to you, the withdrawal from Afghanistan. You're talking about territorial handovers. We can't do it for Putin. Did they not do that to the Taliban?
Absolutely. I mean, and that was a real signal to Russia that we're not prepared to stick it out. The way we left Afghanistan was awful, or the way the Americans left it. $80 billion worth of military equipment left behind.
I wonder where that's gone, Ben. I wonder.
Well, and that's a question I think Boris needs to be asked. What is your interest in Ukraine? People won't let me ask that question on mainstream media. When I want to talk about it, they say, no, it's too touchy a subject. But why is Boris so ideologically moved by Ukraine when he hasn't got a demonstrable ideological bone in his body otherwise? What is motivating Boris here?
Moolah, the dollar. Look, all of these people, we see them as traitors. We call them the traitor class because they've done everything, including the civil service. They are also guilty. When Keir Starmer gets in, they're going to be bosom buddies. And it may well take something like this to see reform, to see your party expand. Like the way we've seen, there are 22 European member states now, Ben, as I'm sure you know, out of the 27. They're led by centre or right of centre parties. Can you see the same happening here?
Yeah, so, I mean, the first past the post system makes it more difficult. The reason, people say Europe's going right. I say nationalist, not right wing. Sure. I don't see them as right wing. Actually, I see them as largely, they're kind of neutral on the left-right thing. They're nationalists. And I think it would happen here. I think the popular demand is for nationalism. But our first past the post system makes it very difficult for us to get a bridgehead.
So you're campaigning for PR? You want PR?
Yeah, I'm not sure I want PR.
Oh, really?
I'm not sure I want PR. I would rather prevail under first past the post so that we don't have to. If you look at what's happened to Geert Wilders, for example, in order to convert his vote into holding office, he's had to give up a lot of his principles, because he needs a coalition to hold office through PR. So he's given up a desire for the Netherlands to leave the EU. He's given up his fight against freedom of movement, except against new accession countries. And that is a dumbing down of the nationalist philosophy. So I hope that I hope we can do it under first past the post. I know Richard and Nigel want PR, but I hope we can do it under first past the post.
That's interesting. And you put forward a decent argument that they're very unstable, a lot of these governments, including Meloni in Italy. You could argue the same with her. She's really feckless and can't do much. She's actually
absolutely
worse immigration than in history in my beloved Italy.
Yeah. And she stood on an immigration ticket. She said, I'm going to stop the boats. That's what she said.
People have seen her cozying up to Klaus Schwab. They've seen her cozying up to the European Union, Ursula von der Leyen and Biden, and they're very disappointed. But finally, we'll save the biggie to last, immigration. Now, you're suggesting that we have net zero immigration. Now, this is quite difficult for a lot of us to get our head around, one in, one out. Whereas there are other policies and things that we could do out there, like the Australians did. You've championed Tony Abbott. Tony Abbott did it by turning the boats around and taking people back. They've also spoken about sanctions, tariffs. Trump did it to the Mexicans when they wouldn't play ball over their border security. He said, you won't help us? Instead of giving you 500 million, how about 50% on all your wines, cheeses, and tacky cars that break down, whether they be Peugeot, Renault, or whatever. Awful. What about that as a helpful tip from the herd immunity?
I think, So the net zero immigration policy is a bit confusing, but that applies to, we're talking about legal migration there.
Okay.
On illegal migration, we've got a zero tolerance. It's got to be zero. We've got to turn the boats back. Nigel was a bit reticent on Question Time the other night to really spell it out, but I'll spell it out. We need a train force like the Belgians did. They've created one which turns dinghies back in the middle of the sea, and they've reduced launches of dinghies from their shores by 92%. Instead of giving the French the thick end of £1 billion, which is what we've given them, we should be saying to them, we will boot your fishing boats out of our waters if you keep sending us dinghies. And we need to take a robust position. We've ceased to be a robust nation. We don't set down guidelines and ultimatums and stick with them. And we need to do it with the French. And we need to challenge their navy. If the boats won't go back of their own volition, we should tow them back. And if the French navy's going to cause trouble, well, we're going to have it out with France. That's what being a nation is. It's not unreasonable. It's not unreasonable for us to turn them around.
The first, as many people say this, the first duty of any member of parliament is to protect the borders, the territories, its shores, and its people. And this is clearly not being done. We won't go down the rabbit hole of Rwanda or the biddy.
It's a waste of time.
I'll have you reaching for the heart pills, sir. You're a healthy man.
It's all rubbish. It's all rubbish. All of that is what I call performative legislative distraction.
Well, it was a bigger theatre than the Clacton Sting. And I'll say that. It was an absolute disgrace. But look, on immigration, I'm so glad that you've clarified that for a lot of our viewers and listeners, is that reform would stop the boats, turn them around, take them back safely and securely and humanely, and make sure they go back to whence they came.
As best we can. What people need to remember is the default position at the moment is encouraging people to cross the channel. It's bedding in death in the channel. It's also inviting criminal and terroristic elements into our own society so that our own people are assaulted. The civilized response here is the protection of civilization, which is stopping the boats robustly in the channel. That's what border enforcement is.
Absolutely. And I've read into your policy, you are prepared to take people fleeing war and oppression, but that doesn't include people from France.
No one from France is fleeing. I mean, they're fleeing the French, which is in itself perhaps justifiable. But
that may well, monsieur. I agree. Well, look, you've been very generous with your time, and I'm going to give you, and you're campaigning, you're doing speeches, you're everywhere and anywhere. So thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you.
You're very, very well. But just as a final thought to your voters, the potential for this party is incredible if people get out and actually do something. What's your final message to our listeners and voters?
My final message is don't give up on our political system. Come out and vote on the 4th of July. Reform UK genuinely represents a 180-degree change in direction from the uniparty policies of the Labour Party and Conservative Party. We will put this country first. We will deliver Brexit. We'll get this country stabilised, territorially integrated, and prosperous.
Well, amen to all of that. And we have to declare we're not in reform, but we do support people individually. And on an individual basis, I wish you every success. And I think the people of Wellingborough would have a fantastic MP if you, Sir Ben Habib, was in the House of Commons. I would love to see the footage of that. God bless. Thanks very much again, Ben. Take care.
Thank you, Mark.